Karma, they say, has a tendency to bite and bite very hard. Pakistan, with its obsession with seeking parity with India, using a cocktail of ideology and terror, and using Afghanistan to seek strategic depth using the same methods, is now itself facing an existential crisis. The Baloch separatist movement is now using the same kinetic methods which the Pakistani army has been using against them for decades. The installation of the Taliban regime in 2021, which was seen by the Pakistani strategists as the high point of their policy making since partition, is now fighting the Pakistani state militarily. To discuss this, we at Samvad have with us Shri Vivek Katju, former ambassador of India to Myanmar and Afghanistan and Secretary West Ministry of External Affairs. Welcome to Samvad, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for inviting me.
Sir, just days before this Safar Express hijacking, the Pakistani radical politician Fazlur Rahman had said in the assembly that 5 to 7 districts of Balochistan would soon declare independence and that the UN would recognize them as a separate country. Now, the Maulana is known to hyperbole, so we could have thought that he's just doing what politicians do. But then the leader of opposition in the National Assembly, Omar Ayub, also said that the writ of the Pakistani state had failed. It was no longer working in Balochistan in at least half a dozen districts. Now, we move on to the South Asian Terrorism Portal, which shows that between 1st of January 2025 and the 23rd of March, 184 security personnel have been killed in action. That is more than an average of more than 2 per day. So this has been going on since 1948. Now, this is the fifth uprising in Balochistan. My question to you, what I would like to understand is why are the Baloches so angry? What makes them so restive?
I've always called the Balochistan issue, as the real unresolved issue or matter arising out of the partition of the Indian subcontinent. Baloch separatism arises from a deep sense of grievance against the Pakistani state, and also, I imagine, against the British, because the Baloch believe that Kalat, their main state, was never part of the Indian princely system, the Indian princely state system established by the British. And therefore, the Kalat rulers had held, and initially their lawyer, incidentally, was, as you perhaps know, Muhammad Ali Jinnah himself, had held that Kalat should be given independence. The areas that were leased by the British from Kalat should be returned to the state, and the state should become a sovereign, independent state. They said that it was wrong to treat it on par with other princely states like, say, J&K or Hyderabad or the 560 odd states in India. The Pakistan Muslim League, in its initial negotiations with the Kalat rulers, seemed to indicate a flexible attitude and seemed to go along with what the the Kalat ruler was saying. But no sooner did Pakistan come into being than the very advocate of their cause, the person who was advocating that cause, of course professionally, Jinnah, turned around and said, no, you can't be independent, you will be amalgamated. And they took coercive action against the Kalat ruler and literally forced him to join Pakistan. His brother didn't, and his brother started what was called the first insurgency. And as you rightly noted, this is the fifth insurgency. So the Baloch people have never reconciled themselves to being part of Pakistan. Second, over these decades, what the Baloch people have seen is that they've really been made into a minority in their own areas. The Pashtun population or the Pathan population has grown tremendously. There has been migration from Sindh, there has been even migration from Punjab, with the result that they've seen that the traditional character of their society has undergone a change. Now, societies don't stay static. There was the Sardari system in Balochistan, and that's now still there in parts, but there's also a rising middle class. The middle class too feels alienated. It feels alienated because they hold, and the Baloch have always held, that uh, Pakistan exploits them, that the natural resources which they have, they don't get any adequate fruits of these natural resources, but that they are sucked in by the other provinces, especially the Punjab. Hence, the roots of Baloch separatism are deep and genuine. And the Pakistan state has used military action against them. During Bhutto's time, they bombarded them mercilessly to drive them to their knees. Some Baloch political leaders have, of course, succumbed to these pressures, but there are others who are not succumbing to these pressures, who are opposing them, and therefore this this real problem. Now, what the Maulana has said, of course, was very premature. And what the PTI people are saying, I don't take that seriously. It is part of Pakistani politics as it exists now, so we can disregard that. The real issue is the strategic question before the Pakistani defense forces and the Pakistan political class, and they really don't know how to deal with it. Because to deal with it, they'll have to give the Baloch a fair deal. They'll have to try to turn the clock back, and it's impossible to turn the clock back in human affairs.
Sir, the Balochistan is a province, and Gwadar was supposed to be the crown jewel of the Chinese enterprise through CPEC. 62 billion about to be invested. I believe 46, 47 has already been invested. It was supposed to turn Pakistan into a totally different state economically. Now, we know, sir, that Gwadar is the focus of the Chinese attention just to bypass the Malacca syndrome, because economically it does not make too much of sense to transport material from Gwadar into China. So will the Chinese watch all this very silently, or you think that they might be more involved, more militarily, or at least securing their own installations, and what it means for the Pakistani sovereignty if it comes to that?
You've asked a number of questions. Let's first take the CPEC. On the CPEC, as I take it, there were essentially three components. First was power production. Second was transportation routes. And third, of course, was Gwadar. Now, independent power plants have been put up in Pakistan under the CPEC, and I think the Pakistan power position has improved. Electrical power more is being generated. We don't hear of as many outages as they used to take place. Of course, the economics of power production is a separate issue. I think the Pakistanis might be getting more and more into debt on that count, and that's not a good thing for their economy. Second, as far as routes are concerned, if you see the routes under the CPEC, the Pakistanis have taken and the Chinese have taken great care to develop twin routes. One which went from Gwadar through skirting Balochistan, then up north. But there was this other route which turned east from Gwadar, went along the Makran coast, and then joined the roadway system via the Punjab. So I think they hedged their bets there. On Gwadar development, you are right. Gwadar has a strategic aspect, there's no doubt about it. And the Chinese are making investments, but the Chinese are a very practical people at one level. They are seeing that there is enormous opposition to Gwadar within the Baloch people. There's a sense of alienation. There's a sense that the local people would not gain any advantage from the construction of Gwadar, that other ethnicities will gain, other Pakistani ethnicities will gain, and the Chinese will gain, and the Baloch will lose out. Now, how the Chinese and the Pakistanis address this issue remains to be seen. As far as the security of Chinese personnel is concerned, I think the Chinese have made it quite plain to the Pakistanis that they expect the Pakistanis to pay greater attention. The Pakistanis have raised some exclusive units for protection of Chinese personnel, but there are failures from time to time. But I don't think that as of now, those failures have reached a critical proportion. Now, there's another aspect, which is that the Chinese and the Pakistanis, more the Chinese, perhaps thought that Gwadar can provide a gateway to the western regions of China. And that is why they made such investments in improving the roadway system from of the Karakoram highway. There, I believe they've been running into some difficulty. I must confess, I'm not certain about the extent of these difficulties, but these difficulties remain, both because of geographical reasons and because of popular resentment in some of these areas against the expansion, because they change the ecology. You know, when you build these highways, then you change the ecology of regions, and that can be harmful to local populations. So these are questions there. And my last comment would be that despite all this, the CPEC is still for the Chinese the crown jewel in the BRI. And they will do everything in their power to promote it, short of trying to take military means, because the Chinese are very wary of taking military means to protect their interests. Second, they'll keep putting pressure on the Pakistanis to try to resolve these issues, both security-wise, but also politically. But there, I think they'll run into two difficulties, which are, one, the entrenched attitudes of the Pakistani political class, where Punjab dominates overwhelmingly the rest of Pakistan. And second, the entrenched approaches of the Pakistan army, because the Pakistan army knows no other way of dealing with the situation except through direct confrontation. Apart from some adjustments which they've tried to make from time to time with the Pathan tribes, I don't think they know how to skillfully manage socio-political movements. The Pakistan political class, they are able to manage, because in many ways, the Punjabi political class or the co-opted political classes from the other provinces, they know how to handle them. But a true political process, I think the Pakistan army is not very good at handling.
So now let us shift attention to Afghanistan. The high point which came when the ISI officers reached Kabul just days after the Taliban took over in 2021. And everything seemed to be so pleasant, so hunky-dory. And suddenly we see this military confrontation between the Talibani regime, the Pakistani army, because the Pakistani army now accuses Afghanistan of harboring the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. So where did this marriage go so sour, so bitterness? What happened?
I think some of us who observe Afghanistan and observe Afghan-Pak relations, etc., knew that there would be a honeymoon period, and that honeymoon period would have could have some dangers for us. But we were also clear, at least I was clear in my mind, that this would not last for a long time. That ultimately the contradictions between Kabul and Islamabad stroke Pindi would come up. And they've surfaced. The Afghan doesn't like to be dictated. No one does, but the Afghan is particularly sensitive to dictation. The Pakistanis, on the other hand, thought that the Afghan Taliban would be grateful because had it not been for Pakistan's complete support in every way, they couldn't have succeeded in the Afghan insurgency against the Afghan Republic supported by the Americans and NATO. So they thought that there'll be some gratitude among the Afghan Taliban. The Pakistanis should have known better that in interstate relations or international relations, there's no permanent gratitude. Gratitude may be an attribute, but also it's very seldom between individuals. But gratitude is not an attribute of interstate ties or quasi-interstate ties if you don't consider the Afghan Taliban as heading a state. And there are problems there because Afghanistan is not a traditional state today. So I think that is where Pakistan made a mistake. Second, there are ideological factors which lead to a certain cooperative relationship between the between Kabul and the TTP. And third, in any such ties, both sides want cards. And the Afghan Taliban would not give up the TTP card. Now, that also leads me to the BLA. They know full well how the Pakistanis played the game in providing sanctuaries and in assisting them with training, etc. They also know full well the kind of games that the Pakistanis have played against us. And the Afghan is a very quick learner. I have a great admiration for the Afghan skill at picking up these things. And we are seeing that today.
Sir, we as observers only see the violence which is happening in Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, but there is a peaceful side also, peaceful protests. Now, Dr. Mahrang Baloch and the Baloch Yakjehti committee, they have been protesting peacefully and seeking accountability for the enforced disappearance of people, whoever opposes the Pakistani regime. Similarly, I mean, their slogan, no to oppression and no to Pakistan's tyranny, is now sort of becoming a war cry in Balochistan against the Pakistani oppression. Now, even the Pashtuns, generally supposed to be very volatile, they have the peaceful side with the Pashtun Tahfazud movement. Now, this movement and leaders like Mohsin Dawar and Manjoor Pashteen, they have spent more time in jail rather than outside. Now, my issue about this is the Pakistani state only seems to be believing in kinetic oppression. And that is the only way they know how to govern, I would say. They never seem to be indulging in negotiations and discussions. Seems that the Pakistani state is basically built on the foundation of military oppression. What is there in the DNA of the Pakistani state, or say the Pakistani army? You were speaking about it a bit before also, but I would like you to elaborate. Why do you do the Pakistani army and the Pakistani state behave in the manner they do?
Look, I'll come to your your question, but permit me to give you a little concept. There are various ways of dealing with an adversarial situation. One, of course, is direct confrontation. The other is maintaining your principled position on certain issues and yet exploring wherever cooperation is possible. The third is, as part of a continuation of the second process, to develop a web of cooperative ties which make it impossible for the adversary, or make it very difficult. I think that would be a better way of putting it. Make it very difficult for the adversary to launch, say, kinetic operations, or to not to seek accommodation where required. This is seen in Pakistan's approaches to India all through the last, 75 years and more, close to 77 now, or more. The Pakistanis have not found it possible to to try the second or the third approach. They've only gone for the first, which is confrontation. They are trying the same thing internally. They've always done that. It's part of a kind of a mental attitude, and we are seeing that against the TTP. We've seen that against the Baloch. Now, that doesn't mean that they haven't tried other things. They have occasionally. You find that there is an accommodation tried through the Jirga process, etc., in KP. We haven't seen that in Balochistan, though they've co-opted Baloch elements into the Pakistani political system. But the Pakistan army, right from the beginning, doesn't understand anything except confrontation and kinetic confrontation. That is why I'll never forget that, say, on Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir in 1996, if you go back to the records, that's almost 30 years ago, the then Chinese president, while addressing the Pakistan parliament, said that issues of history should be left to history and that you should move forward. He was indicating to them, that was of course a different era in Sino-Indian relations too, but he was telling them, the Pakistanis actually, that don't get so obsessed with Jammu and Kashmir, build up your ties with India. And that the policies that you have embarked upon, and the Chinese knew full well what were their policies, would not yield you results, as they have not. Over this period, and you put it so well in your introduction, over this period, the Chinese state has become far more fragile in every way. Politically, today they are in a mess. Confrontation on the Western front is of deep concern to them. Confrontation with Afghanistan. They have a very uneasy relationship with India, despite the initial endeavors of Prime Minister Modi. Fortunately, the ceasefire of 2021 is largely holding. That gives them a little respite. But economically, there's no hope. The IMF bailout is again running into some difficulties. I'm sure they'll be able to overcome them, but that means that the economy will not return to a path of growth, sustained growth. And that is terribly dangerous for Pakistan, because their populations is rising very rapidly, far more rapidly than India's. Socially, they are at odds with each other. There's no social peace. The ideological and theological contestation is very deep. So I must confess, as of now, I'm very pessimistic about Pakistan. But my last point, having said all this, I've always believed that because Pakistan is a large, very large country by itself, it is. It pales into comparison with India or with China, but taken by itself, it's a huge country. It's a country with nuclear weapons, with delivery systems. And no one in the world wants this country, as I say, become a Somalia. So therefore, all external powers have a vested interest in keeping the Pakistan state going as a proposition, if on a drip. So that will continue. I don't see Pakistan splintering. No one can afford it.
So while the world might be interested and Pakistani state itself might be interested in staying united and together, but on the ground things look very difficult. I mean, speaking very difficult because their obsession with India continues. Even after this Balochistan incidences, the army chief and the ISPI director general has been directly blaming India for what happened, while the politicians have been a bit circumspect this time around for whatever reasons. But the army chief and the ISPR is very clear, categorical. So now is this a sign of worry for India? Because this has been a pattern. Whenever something happens in Pakistan, you blame India, and maybe to take pressure off, you do something in India. So should India be worried?
I've written about this recently. I think I've written about it in First Post uh, only some days ago, where I articulated the same sentiment as you did. Uh, I I also noticed what you've noticed, that while the army in its press conference, I think DGISPR went ballistic completely against India. And news reports were that the army chief, in his briefing to the National Security Council, also went full steam in blaming India. Yet the consensus document, even though PTI had not attended that meeting, the consensus resolution which was adopted did not, if I'm correct, my memory did not mention India or Afghanistan. It talked of hostile foreign countries, and that they will not be allowed in, or local groups will not be allowed to exploit the situation in conjunction with hostile foreign powers, and that was obviously a reference to India and Afghanistan. So that was indirect. So you're right, there is this distinction. But what I wrote, and I'll repeat it, your program, was that we know that Pakistan's India policy is ultimately made in the general headquarters. Uh, they take into account the views of the civilian leadership, but they ultimately decide, the corps commanders and the principal staff officers, when they meet under the chairmanship of the army chief, that, to my mind, constitutes the true cabinet of Pakistan. And I think our security planners are no doubt vigilant at this time, as they should be, because it's an eternal truth that whenever a state finds itself in difficulties internally, it tries to turn the attention of its people abroad. Uh, Now, the only problem with this is that if they keep uh, incidents which, quote unquote, are not found unacceptable by India, then it's one thing. But if they undertake an incident, and you can never be certain of how an incident will actually unfold, but if they undertake an incident that India finds unacceptable, then it becomes very escalated. If they hope that they will draw in Trump and others to try to do something that they've always dreamt of mediation on J&K, I think they are barking up the wrong tree, because no country will touch that particular issue. But in some, yes, in the current situation prevailing in Pakistan, our security people have to be extremely cautious. And my last point is, and that is a point I made in my article too, that we should caution friendly powers and the major powers that, look, Pakistan is in deep trouble. They're pointing fingers at us, that we've had nothing to do with what has happened in the Jafar Express incident. We have nothing to do with their problems with the TTP or the BLA. And the major powers should caution them against any adventurism against India as the summer advances. I think that diplomacy would have been undertaken. If it has not, it should be undertaken.
Sir, we would like to conclude on that, and just with the hope that sense and is driven into the heads of whoever is basically controlling Pakistan, that it is better to look inwards and solve issues inwards rather than looking outwards and making yourself a failed state. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for sparing time for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.